How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Curse of Strahd, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we will be diving into the village of Krezk's special events. So of course there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so players don't watch this, but DMs that want added insight on how we can run this thing, let's go ahead and get started. So here we are, rounding off the events at Krezk. Krezk has a lot of fun events that are going on, and they are pretty relevant, whether your players get interacted with the politics around here or not. So let's go ahead and start diving into all of those, shall we? So all of these special events that are listed here are labeled something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. This is a reference to getting married, because at one point it'd be a common thing that you'd get something that's old and borrowed, new, and all that stuff. It's not really common these days, I don't feel like, especially nowadays, considering the whole, as of right this second, no one's going out and doing anything anymore. But, of course, that is relevant to what's going on here. So to start off all these special events, we have something old. When your players arrive to this town, they discover that the burgomaster's son just died recently. And what's going to happen is the abbot is going to learn of this and is going to make his way down to the village and knock on the burgomaster's door. At which point he's going to say, hey, I'll resurrect your son, because the gods of light deem it that the Krezkov bloodline cannot die out. Not yet, anyway. The abbot of St. Markovia does this for free. He simply says, hey, bring out your dead, I'll go ahead and resurrect them. Easy peasy. Hit them with that raised dead, and they are alive. But of course, we all know that if you are brought back from the dead in the lands of Barovia, you automatically suffer an indefinite madness. The other thing to note, of course, is that the abbot is not actually doing this for free. The abbot will lord this over him later on when he demands that he wants something. So he's just basically doing this for a bit of leverage. And that's the whole event right there. Nothing too much going on, except for, of course, the fact that you want to rope your players into this. You want your players to see this go down. They don't need to see the whole event go down, mind you, but you definitely want to show off some of this. Whether your players are staying at the burgomaster's house and they see all of it go down, or maybe they are staying somewhere else and happen to see the abbot make his way down to the village, knock on the burgomaster's door, go inside, then come outside and raise the dead, that's going to be a spectacle, and your players are going to probably show up and be like, hey, what's going on? Who's that guy? Da-da-da. Depending on the lore that you give your players on the abbot, they may or may not understand what is going on here. This event is obviously even more impactful if they have not met the abbot yet. If they have met the abbot, they might get some sort of understanding of the kind of person that he is. But if that is the first time that they interact with this person, coming down from the abbey and personally raising the dead up, your players are going to think to themselves, oh, maybe this guy's a good guy all in all. What's going on here? And then obviously if they go and actually talk to the guy, and as we'll see later on in these special events, we'll see later on that the abbot isn't really too much on the up and up. So of course, very simple special event here. How are some ways we can go ahead and spice things up a bit, should you desire? Me personally, because I'm a sadistic DM, I would go ahead and maybe fool around with the resurrection and possibly make it a monkey's paw. While yes, they return back to life and they have that little indefinite madness, that's not that big of a deal. As we can see here on this indefinite madness table, some of them would be very interesting, of course, if the son got raised back to life and he discovered that he really likes killing people. There's a huge story to tell with that, of course. But, some of these just really aren't that impactful. Something I would consider is possibly over the course of time, the abbot's son slowly begins to deteriorate. And maybe this isn't just his body decaying. Maybe he slowly transforms into some sort of undead abomination. Perhaps he transforms into a flesh golem or a ghoul or one of Strahd's zombies. If your players are spending a decent amount of time here, they basically decide to set up shop here, interact with the locals, and basically use this place as, an operating base, and spend a lot of in-game time here. Seeing that change over time could prove interesting, especially if they start to build a rapport with this individual. Sadly, we don't get any information on how to roleplay Ilya. But, of course, Ilya could be impactful because they are brought back from the dead. And as we'll be seeing later on, the fact that Ilya is raised from the dead is a bargaining tool that gets used later on. So we'll be getting into that pretty soon here. But what I want to cover is role-playing Ilya. Ilya is brought back under the assumption, of course, brought by the abbot, that he must maintain the Krezk bloodline. And, that is very kind of sad to see. If you play it up that Ilya is brought back and he needs to go ahead and, maintain the bloodline and eventually become a burgomaster and etc., that is a lot of burden to bear. And maybe that is too much for poor little Ilya. I would say you should play up Ilya as a young person that is sheltered because their life has been sheltered. Ilya doesn't know anything about the outside world. Ilya's never gone anywhere. Ilya's never done anything. Ilya's basically spent his whole life cooped up in these walls and hasn't even gone up to the Abbey. Think about that for a moment, right? Think about the small amount of world in which these people live in. We can see here, I'm just measuring this out right now for all you guys. But it's, around, only, that's such a small amount of life to live, right? It's kind of sad. It's kind of, it's tragic, really. So I say have these burdens be too much to bear for Ilya. Maybe make it so that he tries to run off and maybe not run away from the village, but possibly runs, away and hides in some little tree forested area here and has to console with himself that he has this huge burden and unfortunately it's getting all thrust on him and he may not like it. Having the players build a rapport with Ilya and being the ones to try and talk Ilya back into coming back and, getting all this horrid affair sorted out could prove pretty interesting and have them tied into the world around them. The second of our special events here is something new. This is, once again, a very simple one. A person is giving birth inside of the village. If your players go ahead and check in on the birthing process, they can see that the woman, one Demira, gives birth to a healthy baby boy. But here's the interesting thing. The baby boy doesn't cry. With a DC-10 inside check, they can determine that the midwife during this whole affair, Krezk, is deeply troubled. If the characters question the midwife, she tells them in confidence, the child has no soul. Very sad. Krezk was raised to believe that newborns are soulless if they don't cry, and she has come to believe rightly that most Barovians lack souls. So this is something that could prove very informative to your players if they haven't already discovered the fact that a lot of Barovians don't have souls. If your players see that there's a bunch of people that live their lives in pain and misery and simply go about their daily business, they may already get the assumption that they are just depressed and aren't doing anything about it. But of course, in the book, we discover that a lot of Barovians don't have souls and thus aren't really that animated. In fact, it is reasonably believed that all named NPCs in this entire campaign do in fact have souls because they are more outgoing and more willing to do things. Except for specifically the bartender in the very beginning in the village of Barovia doesn't have a soul. So if your players haven't already learned this knowledge, they can learn it here, which is a pretty big deal. If this is going on a little bit later in the campaign, they may discover that some potential friends that they have may not have souls, and that is intriguing. You can have a very thought-provoking and deep discussion about what is a soul, what is consciousness, what is free will. A lot of these concepts and ideals can be brought up, and it is very interesting to think that there are people that are living, they are doing things, they are doing jobs, they're going out, they're, getting kids, they're doing everyday things, except that they don't have souls. What does that actually mean and what does it entail? That's something that you are going to have to sit down and decide right away because the book paints this picture that the soulless people in the lands of Barovia just basically sound and look depressed, and that's really not too much to go off of. What does that actually mean? The third special event in town is Something Borrowed. This is when the abbot is going to go ahead and cash in on the service that he provided. He's going to go ahead and say, hey, I want a bridal gown, so go ahead and get me one. And by the way, if you don't get me one in 30 days, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. This is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, of course. Depending on the rapport that your players have with the abbot, this is a tremendous deal. If your players haven't gone and talked to the abbot, they've only ever seen the abbot potentially during the first special event, then this could prove pretty interesting. They see the abbot raise someone from the dead and think to themselves, oh yeah, this is a good guy, totally. And then of course later on he says, oh yeah, give me a gown, and if you don't get it in a month, you're dead. That's kind of, your players are going to be questioning the morality of this guy. But here's the real kicker. No one in Krezk can fashion a gown, which is also very telling of this area because that means that whenever there is any wedding in this location, then no one has bridal gowns. They're just wearing their commoner's clothes. That's kind of depressing. That's pretty sad. The burgomaster is going to understand that he needs to go ahead and send a convoy out to the next town, Vallaki, and go ahead and retrieve a bridal gown. So we get told that there is a special event here, but when do we go ahead and drop it? It doesn't give us a time frame per se, but you got to play this by ear. If you're running a campaign where time in-game is going very, very slowly and the entirety of the campaign is only going to happen within a month, then I would go ahead and drop this maybe the next day after the event where the sun was raised. But if you are running a campaign where time goes by very quickly and your players take a lot of downtime, then you can go ahead and give this a few days and give it some breathing room. This is once again something that you want to have happen in front of the party. This is going to be something where the abbot shows up and says, yeah, I need that bridal gown, and if you don't get it, there will be hells to pay. And that should go ahead and provide some really good motivation. Of course, we have some combative players that are around here and may go ahead and see that as a threat and go ahead and tackle the abbot right here. In which case, go ahead and let combat ensue for a little bit. But if the abbot is on any sort of losing end at all whatsoever, he's just going to go ahead and sprout his wings and fly back to the abbey, no problem. But of course, you should not be playing up the abbot as some sort of Terminator or some divine being or entity. You should be playing up the abbot as someone that seems like just a random, regular human that really can't do too much, except for, of course, your players may already get the hint that he can raise the dead without any material component, which that could be telling in and of itself. After the abbot comes and goes, then the burgomaster is left with the ultimate decision. He must send a convoy to the next town to get this bridal gown. If he doesn't get it, then his town is in trouble. So he's going to go ahead and get some people, including his own wife, to go there. And he's obviously going to go ahead and request that the players show up. Even if the players are here in the town just because they're chilling around and not doing too much, he's going to ask them because he probably recognizes that they're powerful. Your party probably has people that are holding out weapons and armor at all times. So it's going to make sense that your players look powerful to them, no matter what level they show up here at. If your party decides to join along this caravan, then they go ahead and make their way to the village of Vallaki, at which point when they make their way inside, they will discover that trying to find a gown will be an issue. It will cost 50 gold, but Anna herself cannot afford it, and the dress won't be fashioned in time. The dressmakers are quick to point out that Baroness Lydia Petrovna, the wife of Vallaki's burgomaster, the Baron, owns a beautiful white bridal gown. And that's where we put a timer on this thing. There's a lot of things that we need to dissect here. First off, only 50 gold. Your players are running into a bejesus ton of gold in this campaign. So obviously it makes sense that a village that doesn't have any commerce at all, doesn't have any gold, but your players, if you're running this module as written, are going to have tons of gold. They're going to have hundreds, if not thousands of gold. So only 50 gold is not going to matter. One thing I would suggest is if you're running a campaign where your players are getting gold constantly, then go ahead and scale the price accordingly. Make this eat into their wallet. Me personally, I don't run a game where my players get gold constantly because they just don't. They are scrapping for coppers any chance that they can get, and I love that. So 50 gold is actually very reasonable and actually more often than not detrimental to the party because normally they can't even afford that. The second issue here is the dress won't be finished in time. I'm not a seamster myself, but I'm willing to bet if you paid someone enough gold, they can easily spend a whole month straight going ahead and making a beautiful gown. So I personally would go ahead and say that it takes exactly a month to go ahead and make this bridal gown. But you could go ahead and pay for a rush order, paying a little bit extra to go ahead and shave off a few days, getting more hands on deck, building this beautiful gown. If your players are not willing to cough up the change, then the only thing that they get told is that there's only one person in the whole village of Vallaki that could potentially have a beautiful gown, and that is the Baroness. If your players go ahead and beseech the Baroness, they will discover that she is eager to please and is willing to give up her dress for the good cause, although her husband won't allow it and could care less about Krezk problems. So if this event occurs, then that could be a big deal. Your players could have a schism with the Baron, and that's a really bad thing. If your players don't handle this accordingly, then the Baron could go ahead and just kick them out of town, in which case they're screwed. There is nowhere they can go to get their gown, and that sucks. So when role-playing this up, you have to decide, is the Baroness going to defy her husband, the Baron, and go ahead and give away her bridal gown because she thinks that is the good thing to do? How is that going to play out? Is she going to go ahead and say, hey, meet me, at this part of town late at night, and I'll go ahead and have, my servant to give to you or whatever? Or are you going to have it where the Baroness is deathly afraid of her own husband and she's not going to defy him? In which case your players have to beseech the Baron. Is there going to be a skill check involved where your players can try and persuade the Baron? Are they going to be able to intimidate the Baron? Are they going to be able to go ahead and just try and steal the bridal ground and say, screw you all? You need to have these factors into consideration. But of course, the other consideration is, of course, your players more than likely have already been to the village of Vallaki. And if they spend a decent amount of time in the village of Vallaki, then a special event could have occurred where the Baron and Baroness are no longer in power. If the Baron and Baroness are no longer large and in charge, whether they were killed themselves or exiled, whatever the case may be, if they are not in charge, then what happens to that bridal gown? Is it still sitting in the mansion? In which case, if no one is taking charge of that mansion, then they can go ahead and take the thing. No one's going to be able to stop them, right? If your players helped Lady Fiona Wachter take over the town, then what is she going to do? Is she going to go ahead and inherit the burgomaster's mansion? Or is she going to go ahead and just run her own manor as the, basically, town center? Me personally, I would believe that Lady Wachter would not want to inherit the Baron's house because maybe she doesn't want to have to move all of her stuff, and she probably just likes the comfort of her own home, so she's probably not going to move over to that area. She may make it her office, maybe on the first floor, but that whole second floor area, the whole living quarters in the Burgomaster's mansion, she may not go ahead and touch it. So if your players helped out Lady Wachter, it seems more than reasonable that if your players go ahead and say, hey, can we go ahead and get that dress that's up there? Lady Wachter's going to go ahead and say, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care. Something that I hear that happens quite a lot in a lot of campaigns is that the Burgomaster's mansion gets set on fire, and then you have to decide right there, is the dress that is in the Burgomaster's mansion destroyed or is it not? I'm willing to bet that if there's a fire in the Burgomaster's mansion that burns the place down, the dress is not going to survive. But you could go ahead and say that something saved it. Maybe the magical mirror fell on top of it and then it's still alive. Who knows? If the bridal gown is delivered to the abbot, he honors whatever deal he made with the characters, which of course, as we've been over in the Abbey of St. Markovia, he offers to say, hey, I'll go ahead and use the raise dead spell 3 times for your party. Go ahead and bring me your dead and I'll raise 3 of them. So that is really nice. That is something, once again, you need to prop up if this happens here. He will talk to the Burgomaster of Krezk and say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and send the pack on you if you don't do this. But if the players intervene at all, he'll say, hey, if you do this for me, I'll go ahead and raise the dead. So that will go ahead and offer an incentive. Mind you, they are basically being pointed at with a gun when doing this, but at least they get something out of it. So that is the whole timeline if your players are good and kind and actually care about other people. But what happens if they don't? What if they are too busy or they don't care about people? If they don't accompany Anna on her quest, the expedition falls prey to the perils of the wilderness and never returns. Krezkov sends more villages to find them because, of course, not only are they missing Krezkites, but of course included amongst them is the Burgomaster's wife. Unfortunately, those villagers are lost as well. Unwilling to risk any more lives, Krezkov visits the abbey for the first time in his life and makes a desperate plea to the abbot, who ignores the plea. If your players for some reason didn't join that expedition but find themselves here, they could go ahead and escort the Burgomaster up to the abbey, at which point they will go ahead and hear out the plea. Of course, the abbot is not a forgiving man. He will promise divine retribution as punishment for not bringing a bridal gown. So that is a really big incentive if your players have some semblance of good in their heart. The evening after the burgomaster's visit, the abbot releases all the mongrel folk in the abbey's madhouse upon the village, whereupon they steal all of the livestock all around. And this is really bad because, yeah, the villagers get a few kills in. They kill 2d6 mongrel folk. But there is a ton of mongrel folk, mind you. An absolute ton of them. And their job wasn't to go ahead and kill the people of Krezk. Their job was to go ahead and steal the livestock, which in doing so is actually killing them. If the livestock of Krezk are taken, then unfortunately the town is going to starve to death. In this whole debacle, the surviving mongrel folk return to the abbey with their plunder, and the burgomaster is so distraught by his wife dying and all the commotion going on, he hangs himself from the rafters of his cottage a few days later. So of course this is a major blow to the village of Krezk, but even more so this is a major impact on Ilya, the burgomaster's son. If Ilya loses his mom and then he loses his dad, then that's going to really suck. He inherits the burgomastership of the town, and he immediately has a huge issue. His village is going to starve to death because they don't have any livestock. Once again, this really comes down to how you play Ilya, but I would go ahead and say that if your players consoled Ilya and tried bringing him up and trying to, make him fill out the position that he's in, he's going to immediately request that the players go up there and stop the evil tyranny of the abbot and go ahead and kill the mongrel folk and kill the abbot and retrieve all of the livestock to bring it down. I think this can be a really fun sequence. You could basically have this be a Beauty and the Beast moment, except for, in this case, the Beast is the bad guy here. Your players go ahead and lead the charge. And mind you, they don't need to be alone. Maybe Ilya goes ahead and rallies the people, and all the commoners get their pitchforks and torches and storm the abbey, in which case it is going to be an epic fight, where your players go up against the abbot, and in the backdrop, the commoners of all of Krezk go up against all the evil mongrel folk. That sounds totally epic and totally awesome. This special event really shines depending on how your players interact with the world around them. If they are kind-hearted, if they're good and always proactive, then everything is honky-dory, no issue. But if your players are either too busy doing other things, other quests in the world around, or they just don't care, then some terrible things go down, and we see that branching path line of all the different events that can take place. No matter which way this shakes up, it is totally awesome. Except for, of course, the worst case scenario where your players do literally nothing at all whatsoever, and then the town basically loses because Ilya is not going to be able to get all the livestock back. Whether if Ilya goes ahead and gives up and the village of Krezk starves to death, or he goes ahead and mounts an assault against the abbey, in which case that's going to lose as well because the abbot can go ahead and strike down with divine retribution, and of course the mongrel folk are going to be actually fighting back, and that's going to be really bad for the people. This is the penultimate special event of the location of Krezk here, and will decide the fates of everyone involved, and of course including your players. Do the party go ahead and save the day and have a place to truly call home in the lands, or do they go ahead and let this place fall victim, in which case this place sucks and everyone's going to die and life is miserable. The last of these special events located in Krezk is Something Blue. When your players arrive here with Irina in tow, Irina hears a gentle voice calling to her. It leads her to the edge of the blessed pool. If the characters follow her, they get this cinematic moment where all of a sudden Sergei shows up and says, "Tatiana, it's been so long. Come, my love, let us be together at last." In which case Irina is going to go ahead and say, "My beloved Sergei." And they're going to go ahead and embrace in the water, and it's sunshine and rainbows, and yada yada. Irina gets saved. She transforms into the pool and is gone forever. At which point she gets dragged down, and then Strahd is going to get super pissed off. He's going to strike out from the heavens above and say, "She is mine!" And with a crack, a blue lightning splits the sky and strikes the pool. Anyone nearby is going to get struck by lightning, which is actually pretty deadly here. A DC 17 Constitution saving throw, or take 8d10 lightning damage, and that is going to be a bunch of damage. Strahd's wrath destroys the blessing on the pool, rendering its water non-magical, and prevents the spirit of Sergei from manifesting in them ever again. At which point, Strahd's going to be super pissed off and invite them to dinner one last time where he plans to totally kill them because they ruined his chances to be with his beloved. So I'm not going to lie, this is pretty cute, this is pretty epic, depending on the campaign that you have. But I will say, if you're running a campaign where your players have Irina with them as a forever companion, and more importantly, they don't learn Irina's connection to Tatiana from oh so long ago, this is going to come out of complete left field and just be lame. Your players are going to lose Irina and not understand what's going on, and they're going to incur Strahd's wrath, and they're just going to be left there sitting saying, what the heck? What's going on, right? I would strongly suggest that you would only ever run this if your players have a deep, and I mean a very deep understanding of Irina's connection to Tatiana and Strahd's connection and Sergei's connection to Tatiana. Because as written, this just doesn't, it doesn't resonate well. Especially if they just lose one of their friend companions and she's just gone forever. So to basically break this down, if your players have no understanding at all, I would suggest not having this ever come up at all whatsoever. If your players have some understanding of what's going on, they do know that Irina is an incarnation of Tatiana and Strahd wants them, but doesn't know the whole Sergei aspect, then something fun you could do is run this event, but instead of it being actually Sergei, it could look like Sergei, which the players don't know, but Irina would have a somewhat understanding of, but it's actually Strahd. I think that could be fascinating. Strahd shows up and says, "Oh yeah, I'm totally Sergei," and all of a sudden they embrace, and Strahd whisk Irina away to Castle Ravenloft. Totally awesome. If this takes place, then instead of Strahd sending a dinner invitation, he can go ahead and send out a wedding invitation, which can be a total blast. I'm going to be having a whole huge episode on wedding in Castle Ravenloft, don't you worry. If your players know the full detail of what's going on, if your players know for a fact that Irina is Tatiana oh so long ago, and they know the connection with Strahd and Sergei and all of that, then yes, you can run this as written. But once again, even if your players know the full base understanding of it, the fact that there is no challenge to this location doesn't sit well with me. Because in reality, your players could show up to Krezk and get in here almost no issue. They are more than likely going to go ahead and do the side quest to get in here, or they could go ahead and just, sneak in here by climbing the wall or climbing the mountain or whatever to get in here. So it's not that much of a challenge to overcome. And especially if your players have a deep, deep rapport with Irina, it sucks to lose her in the flash of an eye before they can actually do anything. This is perhaps something that can be done extremely well by the end of the campaign after your players have dealt with Strahd. Maybe they go ahead and show up here during the end cinematic and Irina reconvenes with her long-lost lover. I think that's perfectly fine. But during the campaign, I just think that it doesn't fit well. It doesn't really, allow for too much interactivity. It does state here that if characters intervene, pulling Irina away from the water's grasp, the hand sinks back into the pool, Sergei's image fades, and she cries and screams his name, but really that's all that we really get. I personally am a very big advocate for having a final epic wedding at Castle Ravenloft, and I'd recommend not ruining that opportunity by having Irina just disappear from the campaign map, because I think that's just not fun. Something I would go ahead and possibly change up in here is maybe have Sergei in the pool, yes, but not have the ability to go ahead and drag Irina away. Maybe Sergei does show up and say, "Hey, you need to go ahead and help me out here. You need to go ahead and beat Strahd, my own brother, in fact. You need to go ahead and beat him so that me and my long-lost lover can be reunited once again." Perhaps you even allow Sergei's manifestation in this pool to go ahead and reveal some information about Strahd in life. Something even more so that is more present in the Tome of Strahd. Perhaps Sergei gives some very juicy details about the castle that your players may not be pertinent to. Maybe Sergei goes ahead and divulges some information about what Strahd hates and what Strahd loves and all that fun stuff. There's a lot of good information that Sergei could give And that is even more impactful, I think, especially if your players have this all going down, Sergei gives some information, and then you can go ahead and have this moment where Strahd sees this, because he's scrying on the party, of course, or at least this pool, and sees this go on, and then does the whole lightning cracking thing. That's going to be awesome. Especially if Sergei didn't give out the information that he wants to be reunited with Irina/Tatiana. Then Strahd simply saying out loud, "She is mine," and striking the pool with electricity. I think that could be a very cool and cinematic moment. Also, to wrap up this little location, the 8d10 damage I think is pretty cool for a, depending on how high level your party is. But if for some reason your players get here when they're extremely low level, if they're anywhere between levels 3, 4, that could potentially kill some people. So maybe dial it back, just depending on what level you have. Something fun found in the development here is, if Sergei and Irina are brought together, Irina is no longer within Strahd's grasp. Strahd blames the characters for this loss and seeks to destroy them from this moment onward. Not long afterward, he has one of his servants deliver a letter to the characters. So it glosses over this mentioning here, but how the heck do your players get this invitation? That could be done in a lot of fun ways. I'm going to be doing a whole series on the cast of Castle Ravenloft, all of the Strahd's brides, and all the people located within inside, but I certainly think that it should be someone that your players already have a rapport with. Go ahead and say, "My master is expecting you." But of course, I'm a big proponent of having a wedding at Castle Ravenloft over just dinner, but that's just me. And that is it for the Krezk special events. 4 really simple ones on paper, but there's a lot of complexity to go ahead and dive into those things. And really what it comes down to is, how do your players interact with the abbot? That is the most important part here. If your players immediately see the abbot as a villain and go ahead and strike out against them, then yeah, it's just going to be a big old battle. But once again, I totally think that it should be a cool, epic, storming the castle moment with all the Barovian commoners rising up and going up against all the Mongol folk in the sideline while your party deals with the abbot. I think that could be a total blast, totally fun, totally epic. But hopefully it doesn't come to blows like that. I think one of the better outcomes here is that your players actually interact with the abbot in more of a roleplay sense and discover what his true motivations are. And maybe your players go ahead and adhere to whatever he says and commands, and your players go ahead and reap the benefits of that. They can see that the abbot is trying to do good in this world, but he is doing so with vile means, of course. So go ahead and tell me, how do you plan on implementing all these special events in the village of Krezk? Are you going to have them come one right after another, or are you going to allow some breathing room in between? How are you going to handle the information about lacking of souls in this world? Do your players already know this, or do they not? And this is a great way for them to learn. And most important of all, what is going to happen with Irina? Is Irina going to go ahead and be slipped away from this dark, depressing world? Or is she going to be finding herself in a world of even darker despair? That is up for you to decide. That is going to do it for me for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are absolutely awesome. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.